What is going on, everybody? GM Richard here, one of the developer advocates at Chainlink Labs. And while we're waiting for a few more people to trickle in, if you want to let me know where you're from, I always love seeing that. We're going to be talking about games, Web3. This is going to be kind of an informal conversation today. So if you have questions in the chat, please reach out. Let me know what questions you have, anything specifically that you'd like to know about games and Chainlink products and services. Let me know. I'm just kind of going to go through some projects that I've done in the past, talk about how I integrated Chainlink into those, talk about maybe how we could use some of the existing Chainlink products as well in other games, just some things I've thought of. So yeah, let's take a look here. We've got, oh man, Spain, Netherlands, Brazil, Italy. Woof, we're getting all over already. Even though it's a small crew, it looks like there's only like 15 of y'all in here, but it's all right. Smaller group means if you have questions, you can definitely get them answered. But yeah, we'll give it just a couple more seconds before we get started really diving in. And yeah, thanks for sharing where you're from. What questions does anybody have about games in general? We can start off with some Q&A while we wait for people to kind of trickle in. Any questions at all that you have? I guess while I wait for those questions to come in too, I'll go ahead and just share my screen and we'll start taking a look at some things. So in a previous hackathon, I went through creating this Emojigachi using Chainlink automation. So if you're familiar with Tamagotchis, this idea is similar, where automation would basically tick down the hunger and enrichment, like the happiness of this little dude, and you can interact with them. And this is actually a NFT on chain. So that was kind of one thing that I did. If we want to dive into that, let me know. We can look at that. But there is a past hackathon video where I go through actually building this out. I didn't want to just, do the same thing over and over. So that is something, this is from 2 hackathons ago, so exactly about a year ago. We've got some questions. What games do I play and what kind of tools are we going to see? So what kind of tools are we going to see? I think we just go through all of the Chainlink products and just talk about how you could use them in a game aspect. As far as what kind of games I play, stuff way more interesting than Tamagotchi, I'll say that. I've been enjoying the new Call of Duty. I play a little bit of Fortnite and Overwatch here and there, but not as much gaming as I used to do, probably. Starfield was pretty good, but I didn't finish it, and it's definitely no Skyrim. That's my hot take on the video games out there right now. So what kind of products we're going to see? We'll go through all of them, like I said. So we've got this Emojigachi. We could take a look, if y'all wanted to, at how we hooked up this contract on the front end a little bit too. Just kind of go from there. When it comes to the contract itself, we can take a look at that as well. But we'll look at how we hook this up. So we've got this Emojigachi, and let me resize things so that we can see a little bit better here. And back a year ago, I was really into Svelte and SvelteKit, so that's what this is based on. But let's take a look at what we did to actually get this set up. So the first thing is we have our contract in here, and we're going to pull in a couple of different components. And wallet connecting is probably the hardest part of these things, getting that connection set up. So I use Ethers.js to do that. And when it comes to connecting Ethers.js to our contract, there are some really great built-in React libraries out there for doing this with Wallet Connect and everything. This is kind of a bespoke, I built my own connect button. And there's definitely been some things I've learned along the way. So we'll talk about those a little bit too. But SvelteKit doesn't have the robust support that something like React does. So if I were you and building today, I would probably use React. If you want to use something a little more cutting edge, like some flavor of React, like Next or something like that. But if you want to use something a little more cutting edge, Astro is something I've been looking at from a front end framework perspective. Astro is really cool because it has its own language. It's really simplistic, but you can also use React components directly in Astro, so you get that benefit as well. But yeah, so this Emojigachi guy, right? We've got our little face here. We've got a couple little bars here. We can play with him. We connect, we get all the information, and then we have our little attach wallet button. If we were to refresh this, we have our amazing attach wallet button here. Something that I learned along the way. We'll take a look at MetaMask. So I'm currently on Mumbai. If I switch to just something else real quick and I go attach wallet, it's going to look like it's broken, right? So when we're thinking about games and just kind of the user experience in general, one thing I picked up along the way was make sure that you prompt them to switch to the proper network. So last hackathon, I built out this Flappy Bird clone, and when I did that, this wallet connection, for example, prompts you to switch from whatever network you're on to the one you actually need to be on. So something to kind of keep in mind from a user experience perspective, right? You want to make sure that you're on the proper network. This game uses VRF to create a score multiplier. So here at the top, you can see like a score multiplier. So each little bar that you go by is multiplied by that multiplier. And it actually has this little character. The bird itself is an NFT, and you can view it. You can see it on chain. It looks like this one needs to probably have the metadata refreshed. This is where it starts out. It starts as an egg. As you get a little bit higher score, the NFT will change to this little bird, and then it goes to that eagle that we saw in the actual game, this little guy. So thinking about that, so we're using VRF there for that score multiplier. Kind of a weird game mechanic, right? To have the score multiplier be random. So it just depends on like when you're playing the game, if you get that high score. I don't know, maybe it could be a fun little thing to have in a game itself. VRF is also fantastic when it comes to things like loot boxes, anything that you want to have be a random chance is definitely a place where you could use VRF for sure. When we talk about VRF, there's often the question of like, why do we need VRF, right? Like, especially on something like this, right? It's on the front end. I could just do that multiplier right there in the browser. And it would be pretty random. Even when we think about if we want to do it on chain, right? Why does VRF have a benefit? We say this thing is provably random. What does that really mean? I like to think about it like this. When it comes to randomness in a blockchain environment, you can have the ability for miners within the environment to choose which random result they want to put on chain. Yeah, thanks, John, for sharing the link. Yes, so it's vrf.chain.link. So if you wanted to have a truly random result, right, and you have the ability for a miner to choose what random result that gets put on chain, the way that they can do this is they can essentially, it's like rolling a dice, right? So if I roll a dice, I'm going to get a random result when I roll that dice. But if I only have to record the random roll that I want to record, then it suddenly becomes not random. And that's kind of how randomness works in the blockchain. The nodes that are actually mining that block, they have the ability to choose whether or not they include a transaction in the block they're mining. And that can be where they can kind of, take advantage of that. And when it comes to things that are advantageous for them to do that, then it becomes a problem. When it comes to like a silly little score multiplier in a game, this may not be as big of a deal, but when we're talking about loot boxes for things that could be of monetary value, now suddenly it becomes a bigger deal. So those are two examples that I've done in the past. I'd love to hear, like, the hackathon's kicked off. You're here in this workshop time, like this, to learn about games and Chainlink products. Like, are you all building games? What kind of games are you building? What kind of questions do you have about games? And while we wait for any comments, questions to come in, we can pop on over to docs.chain.link and take a look at the different products here. Just kind of talk through where I see these being possible use cases for games. So we kind of talked about automation. Automation has added a couple really cool features lately. So when we used to look at automation, there was only one real option, and that was like the custom automation version. I'll pop this link in here. we had to automation.chain.link and we were to register a new upkeep. It used to only have this custom logic option, which would be the when we had like a check upkeep function that returned a Boolean value and then a perform upkeep function. We've also now got time-based, which uses the Unix cron tab. And then we have log trigger based, which log triggers are really kind of cool. They're new. I haven't had a ton of time to really think about how to use them best. But essentially, when we have a smart contract, it can emit a event, right? And those events are the logs. And that's how we can kind of keep track of things that happen in a blockchain. And log triggers can actually run automation based on those other events happening. And when it comes to games, the first two, I can see where those fit in really well. Time-based, for the emoji gotcha guy, it's actually built with custom logic, that one. But for time-based, that's what I was doing in the custom logic because it didn't exist at the time. But you could have, given certain events that happen in your game, you want a function to run within your smart contract. That's where custom logic would come in. Time-based for like the emoji gotcha would be like every 5 minutes, it's going to get hungrier and more bored, for example. So you just kind of have that like the regular, Tamagotchi, little pocket pet thing. We've got some good questions coming in. Somebody's asking, where can we find the code for this stuff? Let me pull that up in a separate window real quick and get that to you all because it's on GitHub. Some questions here too. Interoperability, moving my assets from games to any chain, is that possible using CCIP? So yeah, this is a fantastic question. So we kind of talked through automation. Let's hop back to the docs and think about CCIP. So we've got CCIP here. It's only on a few chains currently. We've got our supported chains listed there. But yes, this question, like moving assets from one chain to another. I really like that question because the way I think about it is some chains are very beneficial when it comes to things like speed, when it comes to things like cost, right? And maybe you want to have your assets stored on another chain that's a little bit more permanent, I guess, right? Like you could do something on Optimism and you want to end up on Ethereum at the end of the day. So you could do your transactions on Optimism, use CCIP to then move the result of those transactions over to Ethereum. So that's a fantastic question. Yes, you can definitely do that with CCIP. If you take a look at the documentation, probably what you're going to want to be looking at is transferring data between them. So transferring tokens with data would work. There's going to be an example here with some cross-chain dApps that would kind of get you through that as well. So you can kind of learn how to transfer that data across. Sorry, give me 1 second. I got to log into GitHub, y'all. What other questions do we have? How can Chainlink help multiplayer games in genres like Battle Royale? So how can Chainlink help multiplayer games like a Battle Royale? I think VRF comes into play here for anything that's going to be random chance. When it comes to things like CCIP, again, moving things from one chain to another, I think could be a good place to think about Chainlink as well. Battle Royales. I'm not sure what else. What else could we think about here? And chat, feel free, like if you have an idea to kick in. Functions, maybe depending on what you're doing with your Battle Royale. Like if you wanted to call an API for something, you could definitely do that. If you had like your Battle Royale game going and you had some sort of stats and you wanted to save those stats on chain, you could do that with a functions call maybe. That'd be pretty cool. Yeah, log triggers sounds awesome. Do something with an NFT when it's transferred, for example. Yeah, exactly. So you could have some sort of automation kick off when you transfer an NFT because it'll emit that log event and we could get that then. So we're asking about the Flappy Bird code. It's actually in a private repo right now and I can't share it with y'all. Oh, fail. I'm sorry, y'all. I can't share that Flappy Bird code currently. I will work on getting that repo made public. What other comments do we have? Let's see. Have you ever thought about gamifying Oracle clusters? That's an interesting question. Gamifying the Oracle clusters. I guess they're kind of already gamified when you think about the rewards of them getting link tokens. There's a little bit of game theory going on there. How does custom logic work? Do you write a function that returns a Boolean to determine whether you run it or not? Yes, so that's exactly what you do for automation, custom logic. If we look at getting started in here, guides, automation, compatible contract. Is this the right one? Yeah, so in our documentation under guides, creating automation compatible contract here, we've got this check upkeep function. And so it's going to return a Boolean of upkeep needed. It also returns some data. So if you need data for your upkeep function, it can return that data as well. But that's a great question. Yeah. So it basically, you define the logic that you need in here. It can be any logic that you want. And yeah, this is a view function. So what happens is the Oracle network will run this code every block and see, hey, do we need to do upkeep? Like, is this true? If it's not true, it just goes on. If it is true, then it'll come and run the perform upkeep. That's a great question, though. Let's see. We've got another one here. What should I use if I have a dynamic NFT that is updated as the user earns badges and that are saved in the user's wallet, not in the dApp? The data is from Web 2. Can we use CCIP and functions? So it sounds like you have something that is, so they have a dynamic NFT that's going to be updated when they earn badges that are saved in their wallet. But then you say that it's not in the dApp. But if it's in their wallet, that makes me think it's on-chain. So if it's on-chain like that, I would think that this would be a great place for automation log triggers, right? So as they do things in the game, they're going to earn a badge. That badge is then going to be stored in their wallet. Since that badge is stored in their wallet, you could have it emit an event and use that log trigger to then update their NFT. Hopefully that makes sense. So can you use CCIP and functions with this? I mean, yeah, you can. From your use case, what we got going on here, I think you wouldn't really need it for the basic use case that you're saying. But then if you're saying it's Web 2, and so it's not actually stored on chain, these badges, maybe they're stored like, and you have an API that you can hit to look at those badges. You could set up a custom, so you could use functions and automation together, and you could set it up so that functions reached out to that API and checked for the badges. You could run that functions call, that function from the smart contract with automation. And then based on the results of that functions, you could come back in and update that dynamic NFT, if that makes sense. So if that makes sense, feel free to ask clarification there. So should we still do all the processing for a game as client server model and save only some info on chain? Or can we maybe use Chainlink functions to decentralize completely a game? Is it feasible? Yeah, so this is something that, like, I was actually just reading an article yesterday about when to use blockchain. And one of the issues, like the cost of blockchain is that it's slow right now and it costs money, right? Oh, my camera's giving me the thumbs up because I've got like the new update. That's funny. So because it costs money to do things on chain, then we want to limit how much stuff we actually do on chain, right? Given that, storing things as limited as possible on chain is what you want to do. So if you can have pieces that are not required to be on chain and actually do those off chain, that's great, right? Well, one way we can do that is with functions, right? So we can get that information back on chain using Chainlink functions. Another thing that you can do, and this is something that like is pretty new. I was actually just talking with the automation team about this when it came to log triggers, for example. So if we look here, and even with this, like the custom logic here, so this check upkeep, right? This logic is run by the Oracle nodes in the check upkeep, but it's not actually costing any gas because it's a view function, right? So view functions cause the computer that's running them to actually do the compute. And we have this ability to pass information back with this bytes memory perform data. So you can take information and pass it back in. And given that, you can actually kind of take advantage of the automation network there and have a like trusted source of compute, if you will, that's going to run your code and then pass it back into your perform upkeep. So you can kind of get the best of both worlds. Hopefully this is making sense what I'm saying. But I think that answers your question. I'm realizing that my camera may be doing some crazy like blurring stuff too. I don't know how to turn that off right now. But we'll take a look at that later. Would it be greater to multiplayer when someone is playing? So maybe it would be greater to multiplayer when someone is playing from L1 and another in L2. I think this is going back to the question about battle royales, right? And using functions there, maybe. So yeah, we can definitely take, using CCIP, you can start to make a game that is chain agnostic, if you will, right? Like we don't care what chain you're on. And you can have that cross-chain functions as well, for sure. Oh man, there's a 3-part comment here. So I have a question. It's more of a debate subject. I'm completely sold on the idea that on-chain game assets are great, but I'm not sure about the game logic. Using blockchain instead of a classic backend is making the trade-off of sacrificing scalability for decentralization, but do we really need player A move to place X on a public ledger? This would also be hurting other users of the chain. The solution is to spin up an app-specific chain, but this is really different from having a centralized backend. It's still kind of centralized. Yeah, so this is what I was talking about. Like there's definitely trade-offs when it comes to the blockchain space, right? Where you're going to have those costs of both like, speed and stuff like that. I think that what you're thinking, like the path that you're thinking about, like which pieces actually need to be on chain is like right on the money when it comes to gaming. Because I mean, let's be honest, like we'll just take like Fortnite, for example, right? All the data in there's no way to play that game 100% on chain, right? You can't have all of the user data being on chain. If we start to think about maybe the stats at the end of the game for like how your performance was, putting that information on chain, if you wanted to store that information there, that starts to make sense to me. If we take another popular game, Counter-Strike, for example, having the ownership of different skins on chain starts to make a lot of sense. But like every location out there, that doesn't really make sense when it comes to that sort of thing, So I think that you're on the right track there with what you're thinking. Are there any real-time examples of Web3 games? I am drawing a blank on a couple of them that I've heard of recently. There's a tank one. I can't remember what it is. I just saw it not that long ago. So if you head here, Alchemy actually has a great blog post on this. Let me pop this in here. And take a quick little browse through this as well. So yeah, Alchemy has this great little list of Web3 games as well. You can kind of take a look at what's here. There's quite a few. Some are better than others, obviously, as far as like if they're AAA games or not, and what they're doing. But yeah, this is kind of a good place to get that information as well for when it comes to what games are out there. And I have to say, y'all are asking great questions. Like I love the interaction that's going on, so I really appreciate that. We talked about automation. We talked a little bit about VRF, functions, and CCIP a little bit as well. I don't know what other questions y'all would have about those. I think that's when it comes to gaming, the idea of having like every single transaction on chain may not necessarily be to the question that we had earlier, where you want to go just from a like user experience. I think that user experience is probably key when it comes to these things, realizing that in order to make a game that's going to have any sort of success, it has to be a game that people want to play, right? Some games are more tolerant of a slower experience. Like if you had a game of chess, for example, that's gonna be a lot slower experience than a game that's like a multiplayer shooter, for example, right? Like those two are just different speed games. Chess, you could definitely have the entire thing on chain, and that might make sense, maybe to have that all on chain. But again, I think it's the end states, in my mind at least, that are going to be more important when it comes to actually storing that information on chain. So yeah, and so we have any thoughts on app specific chains for games? What advantages does it really have over a classic backend? So app specific chains can have massive advantages when it comes to cost and speed for that specific application that you're using. I know there's a couple different chains out there where that's their thing, right? Is going to be creating a bunch of small side chains basically that are going to be app specific. So what advantages does that have over a classic backend? Again, I see this as like with blockchain, you get the built-in effects of decentralization. You have transparency kind of built in because even though it's going to be app specific, it can still be transparent where you can see the code, you can see the contracts that are deployed. You can make sure that you know how those work. When it comes with the concept of app specific, I think that you get into a weird gray area where it kind of depends on how those chains are deployed. Like if they're app specific, but anybody can spin up a node, that's awesome from a like decentralization and like trust standpoint, right? You can know that, you know, if it's something that's important to you, as long as you have a node running, that chain will always be there, right? Like even if it's just one node, which is like not great for a blockchain, but hey, it still exists. If it's something that's like a proprietary backend, then yeah, we do kind of get into the gray area of like, well, it's not decentralized anymore. It's just like using blockchain technology, I guess. But you do have like the cryptographic truth and promises of like when this thing happens in the code, we know it's going to happen. And that code being more transparent is a big benefit. Hopefully I'm answering your question. But yeah, I think that we are kind of at that growth and inflection point where people are starting to realize that everything on chain may not be where we need to go, and being selective and ensuring that the pieces of information that you're storing on chain are the important parts because there is that benefit, right? And there are trade-offs to actually running a game where there is a blockchain component. There's definitely trade-offs to that. And so making sure that you are intentional about which pieces you put on chain that are the pieces that one matter and two like are going to enable a different user experience. Because the thing too, when it comes to the end user experience, like I'll use Counter-Strike as an example. As long as everything is going great with the skins and the ability to sell them in Counter-Strike, nobody's going to care that it's not on chain. For like from the end user point, right? Because they just care about that user experience. And so if you have the option between a slower version and the version that's now, and there's no difference that they can see, why would they go for the slower version? But if you now have the ability, like if something were to happen and you lost your skins because you don't actually own them, now suddenly there's a big reason, right? Somebody pays $100 for a skin in the game and it gets taken away from them. Now they have a reason to care about it. And so that's the sort of stuff that like would be very useful and important to have on chain. And there's a reason for that. To have, you know, the entire playback of a game on chain, I don't see that as being necessarily something that would be worthwhile. Maybe I'm just not a hard enough core, you know, CS:GO gamer to get that. But yeah, so CCIP lets you use chains that you could have faster changes and less expensive changes, and then put that information on another chain if that's what you want to do. You could also be sort of chain agnostic, where it doesn't matter what chain somebody was using your game on, which I think from a end user standpoint, that's also very important, right? If I want to play your game and I live in Polygon world and you are on Avalanche, maybe I don't want to, get into the Avalanche ecosystem and deal with getting some sort of on-ramp and moving money over there and all that stuff. So I don't play your game. If you have CCIP where you can just, accommodate those users on other chains, that's great for your game. It's kind of like the old, like when you have a PlayStation exclusive game or like, an Xbox exclusive game, you're kind of getting rid of a big portion of the population there when you're not available on their platform that they're playing on. When it comes to functions, I think there's a lot of interesting use cases there where you can bring game information on chain. I think that's one use case that hasn't really been thought of that much, running a game like normal, but then bringing the information on chain. You can even do that now with games that exist already, right? You could take your Counter-Strike stats and store them on chain. I don't know what the APIs exist for showing who owns what skins, for example, but you could create a NFT for all the skins that somebody owns as well. Automation, we talked through that pretty heavily, and VRF, I feel like. So as far as where to kind of integrate these things in, I feel like we've hit those pretty well. I don't know if you have other questions as well. When it comes to games, thinking about functions, one interesting thing you could do is bring in weather data into any assets that you're creating on chain with functions. I kind of think that's interesting, kind of blending real world in with the game world. I think that's definitely something that is interesting. Hasn't been done a whole ton. I do vaguely remember, I forget what game it was. I want to say it's one of the Pokemon games that I had growing up on Game Boy. Would take your internal clock, and it would actually have day and night in the game. And there's only some Pokemon that you could catch at night, and you had to play at night. Maybe I'm just making this up from how I thought it was as a kid, but I think it was something like that. One other comment we've got here is UX and when NFTs and or tokens. So yeah, user experience, hugely important when it comes to these things. And I think that's something that's I don't know, as a developer advocate, I feel like we haven't spent enough time, or at least personally, I haven't in the past, advocating for the user experience side of things. I've been focused on, just the technology piece and why it matters. But the more I think about it, we really need to, as developers, focus on making users' lives easier and better, and even abstracting away the complexities and all the stuff involved with the blockchain environment. When it comes to account abstraction, so I gave a talk at SmartCon about account abstraction, and I think that has a big role to play, especially in gaming, right? If you can abstract away all of the Web3 stuff from your game, from a user experience standpoint, right? So just imagine you're playing Counter-Strike. I'll just keep using Counter-Strike as an example, right? Because they actually have a fairly robust skin marketplace there, and people are selling them. But if they just behind the scenes implemented in account abstraction with a wallet that was just a custodial wallet for now, and put those skins on chain and did gasless transactions, so nobody even knew it was happening until they're oh, hey, by the way, with your account information, you can now claim your wallet and you have your NFTs on chain. That's how you win, in my opinion, with users, is they don't even know they've gotten this upgrade until they find out hey, it comes with these benefits, right? And so you actually own your stuff. You have the ability now to sell it or take it somewhere else. Other games can know that you own them as well, and suddenly now your skin from Counter-Strike becomes even more valuable, because whatever Call of Duty uses the same skins unless you use them as well. And suddenly this thing now is something you own and can take with you. And I think that idea of behind the scenes enabling this technology without like throwing it in the user's face is probably the biggest thing that like we as developers need to kind of think of moving forward. If that makes sense. I know I've kind of gone on a little rant here a little bit, but yeah. So what other questions do y'all have? Y'all been like fantastic though, asking about all these different things. I really appreciate the interactivity. Makes it a lot more interesting than just talking to my camera by myself. Is there anything y'all would like to see? Take a look at? While we wait for that, I'm going to go through some of these games. Alchemy, take a look here. Axie Infinity was a really big one. If you haven't heard of that, I don't know if it's still as big, but it's basically Pokemon with NFTs. It's pretty cool. Check one of these out real quick while we wait. Yeah, so we're talking about what parts to store on chain, right? Sorry, I wasn't sharing my screen, yo. Is that like super blurry? What is going on? There we go. Okay, I think that's better. So this game, Dustland, I've never heard of it before, just now looking at this. But so it's a move to earn audio fitness game. I remember there was an app a long time ago on the App Store that was basically like a zombie game where you had to run, basically unlock more of the story. It's back when Walking Dead was like huge. This is probably similar, right? So you have this app on your phone where you're running and it's recording that. So the app is running on your phone. It's obviously not running all the stuff on the blockchain. Keeping track of your maps and stuff like that, probably not on the blockchain, I would bet. But your results, right? So when you finish a race, your speed and stuff like that, that's probably what they're storing on chain. Just kind of looking at like a real world example of that. And this is something else that you can do is like you can go through some of these games and look and like be critical like what you're thinking about which pieces are they actually storing on chain. So yeah, we got a comment here. I was talking about that with a Web3 social login project community yesterday. It would be amazing to be able to log into Unity games with a Web3 social account. Yeah, that's true, right? And like logins, for example, are one place where I feel like there's this like untapped benefit of Web3. And it's not like crazy fancy new tech. It's just like the ability to be able to sign and verify who you are is built into all the wallets that we have now. And you don't have to have an email or anything like that. That's pretty cool if you think about it, that you can have users sign up and they don't have to give you any information. Because I know like privacy is a big concern with a lot of people. Understandably, right? And when it comes to things like that, like having the ability with like a social login, like what you're saying, using your wallet to log in, I think is a massive possible benefit as well. Yeah, we can do better than Pokemon. I mean, Pokemon's pretty cool though. Like, I think that's a Web3 enabled Pokemon-like game would be really cool, where your Pokemon that you have, like those are NFTs, right? That makes sense to me. So in the game Pokemon, this is a good example. Just kind of talk through it. In the game Pokemon, uh, things that would make sense to me is using Chainlink, right? So like you encounter a new Pokemon, and that's going to use like VRF to figure out if it's shiny or not, right? Because that's like your random chance. But when you capture it, that's going to be a NFT that you own as your wallet. And the entire game doesn't need to be on chain, where you are, all that stuff, but just which Pokemon you own and like what their current stats are, right? Like what their health is and stuff like that. That could be on chain. And those could be NFTs, and they could be like dynamic NFTs that like level up and change and have different skills and stuff like that as you go along. This also gives you the ability to then trade them with other players, and you can actually, have a record like where the Pokemon came from. Different players can own them. And I think that's a pretty cool use case for sure. But yeah, it's all about figuring out how to have that good user experience where there is that careful blend of what is and what isn't stored on chain, so that you have that fast interaction with the game, but then you also get the benefits for the parts that matter, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't know what other questions y'all have, other thoughts. That's about all I have right now. And this is an hour, but we're at 45 minutes. But yeah, hopefully you got something out of this. I tried to take a little bit different approach instead of just showing you like one thing, kind of talk about how you could use them, so then you could think about within your projects where things go. This is a good question. So some games require privacy, like a player's decision in rock, paper, scissors. How would you be able to hide the player's moves from the blockchain? Now, when you say hide them from the blockchain, I think what you really mean is hide them from the other players, right? So like if we are playing on a decentralized rock, paper, scissors game, and odds are we're not going to be making our decisions in the same block, right? So like my move will be stored and you could possibly see it, is what I think you're getting at. A couple different ways I could think about this. One would be some sort of like hash algorithm, right? Where the game has a private key that it knows about. So you encrypt it with the game's private key. So like you see the encrypted version on chain, that's of no value to you. I guess if you were like, the game itself and you were wanting to be malicious, like you'd run into that. But yeah, I think that like using that, like some sort of like, private key encryption, like hashing would make sense there for how you could deal with that. The other thing is, no, you probably couldn't. You'd have to have that ability built in. I think that's probably how I would approach that, is with some sort of like hashing encryption idea. So it's going to be stored on chain, but then the value isn't necessarily of any use to the other player when it comes to that. I had an example. I've seen some examples with like guessing games that work the same way, where the contract itself will like encrypt the value, and when you're guessing to like against that encrypted value to see if you can like, your encrypted guess matches the encrypted value that's stored in the contract. So it would be something like that, if that makes sense. But that's a fantastic question, because yeah, that definitely can come into play for sure. I mean, on-chain rock, paper, scissors, this would be pretty good. High stakes rock, paper, scissors, you could put like a little ETH in there with it. I don't know. It's the real gambler's game. No. About rock, paper, scissors, if the contract can check, people can check. And this is the kind of problem with ZK proofs are here to solve. So yeah, this is true. Like if the contract could check, then somewhere that's going to be stored on chain, right? So yeah, ZK proofs probably would be a better solution to that as well. You can have it. I guess in my mind, I was thinking about that guessing example, and the key is not stored on chain in the same way, so you can't like see it ever. But it doesn't really work if it's built into the contract. So you're right. That's a good point. Um, that would be a tough one. You know, your comment was right on about the ZK proofs, for sure. Well, yeah. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Y'all been a fantastic audience. It's been awesome chatting with y'all. About the hackathon, any hints, pointers about things you would love to see in a game? Man, there's been some interesting games in past hackathons for sure. When it comes to things like I would love to see, uh, I think I don't know. Games are tough when it comes to hackathons too, because um, we often think about games and like I don't know. I think a lot of people go straight to like major like AAA studio games, like wanting to create something like that. Like another game that I've played a lot of, like I don't think of it as a electronic game, but I guess it is like Magic the Gathering. I think that is a perfect example of something that you could do with like the Web3 part, like where you so Magic the Gathering is like a collectible card game. Pokemon has one, like Yu-Gi-Oh. They're all the same basic idea, right? You get cards and you play against another player who has a deck of cards. So the card ownership is something that would be important to have on chain. The rest of it could be off chain. Um, when it comes to like things for the hackathon, things that love to see in a game, I think that's when you're presenting the game to the points that we've been talking about most of the time in this presentation, like explaining not just the game, but like why you set it up the way you did, I think would be awesome, right? To have that intentionality in there for which pieces are on chain, why you're using which Chainlink product you're using, stuff like that. When it comes to like the actual game itself, I don't know. I feel like this space is definitely a pretty green field when it comes to like things you can do. Um, like a collectible card game would be amazing. Having something like that Dustland game that we're looking at, like that sort of thing, encouraging like positive outcomes in people. I think that's really cool, like gamify that kind of stuff. And even just thinking about it, not like creating a game, but how can we gamify other pieces as well? Like somebody's saying, like a social deduction game, right? Like I'm assuming that's something like Werewolf or something like that. Um, might be something you do on chain. I don't know how you do that on chain, like which piece you'd store on chain. Because like, and maybe you don't mean Werewolf when you're saying social deduction games. That's just kind of like what I think of when I hear that. Because you wouldn't want like who's the werewolf to be stored on chain, because that would kind of give away the whole game. but yeah, I think that there's a lot there as far as like the ownership of in-game assets, and then also having like your stats stored on chain. I think is something that'd be really interesting too. With maybe like a soulbound NFT, right, that stores your stats, so you can't just trade those around the same way. But yeah, that's where I would go. Hopefully that helped, made sense. Any other questions, or should we call this a wrap, y'all? I don't know what T is. Laura. I'm not sure what that is. I think we might call this a wrap then, y'all. Again, like thanks for hanging out, spending time chatting with me. It was awesome. Really appreciate it. I think we'll call that a session. If you have any questions, anything like that, make sure you reach out in the Discord. I know we've got like office hours with the DAs in Discord as well. So y'all can sign up for those. So yeah, thank y'all. I'll catch you in the next one.